got to, they engage in filing down the text, which is not smooth at all. Not smooth at all. Synonymous parallelisms, all these sort of things that no one would use in with any decent English. No one would write that way. No one would. You would get your paper handed to you. So your teacher wouldn't be happy with you if you wrote that way. So what they do is they reword it, but really reword it so that it reads well, because it's not written in a way that reads well. Now, the reason it's written in a way that's not reads well is because the Bible is the word of Hashem. It's literally the master of the universe who created your kidney. You know what a kidney is? It comes from the mind of Hashem. Do you have any idea what a spleen does? You know what a pancreas? You know what's going on in here? Do you know what a liver does? If you study what a liver does, either in a human or other animals, you'd fall on the floor and worship Hashem. The liver is so you imagine the mind that forged the liver, the mind, the Hakadosh Baruch, the Almighty, is writing to us, and we're trying to understand the liver. And the more we study its functions, hundreds of functions right now, as you're listening to me, your liver is performing to keep you alive. Not one, not 20, hundreds of things your liver is doing to keep you alive. Chas v'chalila, someone's liver starts to shut down. That's the end. And you don't even know it. Right now, as we're talking, we're getting infections. Every person, we're all getting cancer every day, and our body is fighting it off. Could you imagine? So, the master of the universe, this all comes from his infinite mind. How could he possibly reduce that down to communicating with us? Do you understand? So, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be his name, writes in a way, or inspire the prophets to write in a way that would push us to think a certain way, because Tanakh is not a history book, although it uses history to convey an eternal message. Tanakh is an instruction manual on how to live your life. That's it. That's it. And how is HaKadosh Baruch Hu as we can. That's it. Not interested in anything else. How's this germane? Very simple. The translators are there because they want, it's a crutch. They're producing a wheelchair. And they're trying to make Tanakh readable. And therefore, they're all these awkward phrases. Believe me, it's awkward. Redundancies, and it's written. Like, could you just say it there? Again, test this out. Go to the commentaries, especially the Jewish commentaries, because they're very interested in the language. The Christian commentaries are not, because most Christians, I'm not saying this to be disparaging, wouldn't even understand what they're talking about. So they're all consumed with this. The point is that the translators are all just trying to make it sound great. And then there's some translators that also try to make it sound wonderful. I mean, the King James, it's not with its many faults. It's a criminal translation what it did to Tanakh. But the 47 members of the Church of England, in very good standing in the early 17th century, they were commissioned in 1607, they wanted to make it sound great. And it does. I mean, Psalm 23 sounds great in the King James. So you are what I want to drill into your head is how vulnerable you are to the translator. So, that all said, what you need is a translator that you can trust, but no matter what it is, it's a wheelchair, whatever it is, it's a crutch, whatever it is, people have reworded it so it's readable. I don't want to overburden your head, you have enough on your head from what you heard. But there is, among the translators, there's sort of there's more than that, but two major streams of translating. One trying to be as loyal to the word for word to some degree, but then it's not really very readable because Hebrew structure is just hard, or just smoothing it out so it reads really well. And some of them do that well, but of course, you abandon to a much greater degree what it literally says. Okay. And the other thing is that in Tanakh, there's a presumption that you know what it says earlier. There's a presumption if you're reading Isaiah that you already know, you're already familiar with the book of Samuel. You're familiar with the book of Kings. Even though the book of Kings was written later, but meaning it was written by Jeremiah, you're familiar with that. And Isaiah just presumes you know this. And Isaiah, as an example, a book so many of us cherish, adore, and love, I would say of 66 chapters, maybe 7 of them are written using standard prose with a standard chronology in chronological order. It's almost all poetry, not just any poetry. This is not Frost. This is not Pushkin poetry. It's just this dense, very dense biblical. We're calling it poetry. It's just a very dense language with symbols, and you've got to know what's going on. You've got to unlock it. It's not easy. All right. I made that whole speech. You need to know this. Now, that said, what you really should aim for in a translation is a Jewish translation, and one that, meaning it's done by religious Jews. So that means not Jewish publications society, and certainly not the one from the early 20th century that was really a retweaking of the Revised Standard Version. I'm not kidding. Read the introduction. I'm just going to make this recommendation, so I'm not going to make people nuts. You should you should invest in the Art Scroll translation of Scripture, and I would not recommend getting the single volume Tanakh. You could do it, but all you're going to have is Hebrew and English to be that thick, and very little of the commentary has been translated or elucidated. I'll explain that. Conversely, if you invest in a Jewish library, it's an investment, and you get, let's say, the 5 books of Moses together. It's a stone chumash by Art Scroll. And then they have a separate volume on Isaiah and a separate volume on Jeremiah, Ezekiel. You get it. So what the page will look like is that the very top of the page, you'll have the Hebrew and the English, the Hebrew on the right, English on your left. But the vast majority of the page will be a not just translation, but elucidation of the super commentaries, especially the medieval commentaries. Now, what's the difference between a translation and elucidation? Well, the great commentary, the super commentaries, they were geniuses. They were able to, they were so brilliant that they just wrote a few words and they just assumed you would pick up what they're saying. And very frequently it's very difficult to do. So an elucidation is it provides illumination, and it adds in words and paragraphs to explain what did they mean, what did Rashi mean in the 12th century, in the 11th. He was born in 1040, was nifter in 1105, so essentially in the 11th century. What did Maimonides mean in the 12th century? Maimonides actually was interesting because he was a genius, but he actually was able to write material in a way that the average man could understand. That was his goal, but he generated so much commentary. So here's the deal. If you can, invest not in the $150 Tanakh with just a small amount of commentary. They just can't get it in there. There's just going to be a few lines. I would, if you, unless you want it as a reference book, but if you really want to invest, I would say to you, get Art Scroll's separate volume on Isaiah alone. There's a separate volume on Jeremiah alone, Ezekiel alone. The 12 prophets, I think, come in 2 volumes. Daniel, whatever it is, it's 1 volume, I believe. And if you do that, you're going to have a real Jewish library, and you'll have that for the rest of your life. And then you'll be able to, they'll tease out, these super commentaries will just tease it all out for you and say, look, if you understand this passage, look there. And they teach you. It's like having a teacher now. It's not the same, but that's what I would recommend. So I would recommend artscroll.com. They're the largest Jewish publishers in the world. And resist the temptation of getting the single volume, but rather get the individual volumes. It's, of course, much more expensive that way. Mm-hmm. But in that way, you'll be able to have somebody holding you by the hand with an English translation and elucidated so that you can understand what these super commentaries were saying. Thank you for your question.
Awesome. And if you're just now tuning in, which many of you are, there were 2 videos. I realized there was something that I had imported into my software that was causing a sync issue. So I had to sever the connection and reconnect it right away, but it created 2 separate videos. So if you're watching this, you missed the first part, just look and you'll see part 1 coming back later on. So here we go. Caller, you're live on the air. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from.
Hey, good morning. This is Rudy calling. I am from Canada.
Welcome, Rudy.
Thank you. I have a question for Rabbi, and I'm not sure how to word it. Hopefully, I do a good job at it. So in Leviticus, we have the law of Thesaurus. When somebody has stricken with Thesaurus, mm-hmm. they have to be quarantined out of the camp for 7 days.
Leprosy for the people who
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they have to be quarantined for 7 days, and the priest looks at him. And if he's healthy, he's allowed to come back into the camp. He has to go to wash himself and wash his clothing, and he returns. If not, he's again another 7 days. Now, Miriam had led Thesaurus and then God healed her from this. And then we have King Uzziah. That it says that King Uzziah, in the year he died, when he went to the temple to offer incense, he got Thesaurus. But then he lived outside the camp for the remainder of his reign in a house built outside the camp, and he reigned. Now, my question is, was he not forgiven for the sin of burning incense in the temple, or am I missing something?
You're not missing anything, young man. You just have a lovely mind. And one day I'd like to meet you, and when I do, you're getting a big hug. Mm-hmm. When this plague thing is over, you're good.
All right,
you're really good. So, Gebench Cup, really a blessing on your head, Mazel Tov. No, that was a really good question. No one's ever asked me that question.
So we'll go ahead and disconnect now, then, and you can tune in for your answer.
Thank you.
You bet. Thanks. Bye. All right, Rabbi, take it away.
Oh, wow. Well, we really are fortunate to have listeners of that level. It's really good. Okay, great. So, what we have in Tanakh, we're introduced to this in the Torah in Leviticus chapter 13, but it's in quite a few other places. Well, people received tsaras. Now, because of Jerome and he was the primary translator of the Vulgate, the Latin translation of the Bible, the name leprosy, the word leprosy, which is a real malady, and it's not been stricken from the world. I remember in Indonesia, there were people who had leprosy. Very tragic. And I saw with my eyes. So this is not leprosy, but that word became into vogue because leprosy was a very serious disease, and people were familiar with it, and the fact that people had to be isolated all so but it isn't leprosy, that's the point. Not only that, you didn't discuss it, and I'm not going to discuss it, but clothing and buildings could have this discoloration. The priest could observe it, and as you mentioned, a person would be then sent into isolation. Typically, and I'm using that word very deliberately, the person would be inflicted with this miraculous disease. It was not a natural disease. I mean, clothing and houses got it. For not speaking correctly, meaning for speaking Lashon Hara. It was really one of the only punishments of a disease that was completely miraculous. And the reason why HaKadosh Baruch Hu used a disease that's uh, miraculous rather than one that there was no shortage of diseases out there is because people think they could say or do what they want. They could just say words or do things that just don't seem important. Lashon hara means evil speech. It means saying something bad about somebody, disparaging about someone that is true. If it's not true, it's mighty shemra, horrible. But we think that if we say, "Oh, you know what Judy did? You know what Shirley did? You know what she did? She did this. You know what kind of life she lived before." So we think, it's only a word. I didn't steal money. I didn't break into a bank account and steal her savings. It's a word. It's a word that goes into outer space and disappears. And this is so dangerous. And I'll ask you the question, my dear friends. What has hurt you the most in your life? Has it been a physical pain? Uh, or has it been pain that you endured because of words that people uttered to you or behind your back that brought you the greatest pain? You don't need to answer that question. I know we all know the answer. So therefore, Hashem is saying, I'm watching you. You can't act in this way, even though you're not stealing, you didn't murder, but you might as well have been. And you spoke in a way that was inappropriate. That's what saras was. That's typically how saras was used. And then the person had to be isolated, and as you said, and then the priest would examine it, and it's more elaborate than that, but we're going to leave it right there. Miriam spoke of Moses, her younger brother, in a way that was uncomplimentary about how he was behaving vis-a-vis his relationship with his wife, whatever. So she got saras, and getting saras is like being dead. In Tanakh, the color turning white is like that. A mitzvah is like someone who dies. It's like and I could show you from text. I'm not going to go into it, but if you look in the story of Miriam, it's literally she's become as a corpse. So tsuras, one thing we can know about it is that it's a malady that in some way mimics death, because you can kill somebody with words. You can kill somebody with the way you behave without killing them. Okay, got it? You know, I mean, when you have said in your life, I'm talking to you, the viewer, when I heard him say that about me, I could have died. That flushing of the face of embarrassment and hurt, you feel like, okay, you got that all. I want to make sure you know that. Okay. Now, as it turns out, there was some times that people behaved in a way that was completely unacceptable, and they received it saras. However, this saras was there as a symbol to others, and they had to leave the camp. The very famous case that you're referring to occurred during when there was an earthquake. It's the only earthquake recorded in Tanakh of the king. He had two names, Uzziah or Azariah. Either one's the same person. He's very so his Uzziah reigned for 52 years. His son Yotam was a great king. His son Achaz is infamous, very evil, the worst, and Chizkiyahu was that his son. So you can get a sense of history, meaning they lived during the time of the Assyrian Empire. He lived, let's say, roughly 2,800 years ago, 2,720 years ago. What happened? So in Isaiah, there's a reference to him, and it says that after Uzziah died, when Isaiah 6, verse 1 says that, it doesn't mean he literally died. It means that he became a leper. How did that happen? Well, it's not told us in Isaiah. It's very much the style of Isaiah just to refer to something, and you better know what's going on somewhere else. In this case, you would have to be familiar with 2 Chronicles chapter 26. Uzziah was a very great king. At the time of his life, he was a Davidic king that reigned longer than any other Davidic king. He would come to reign for 52 years. He was enormously successful and a very good man. There would be another king who would reign a little bit longer than him, 3 years longer than him, Menashe, would be his great-great-grandson. But Uzziah was really a very great man, a giant of a person. And he was a very successful king on many levels. Spiritually, very successful. Militarily, he was able to liberate many parts of Eretz Yisrael from our enemies. And what happens sometimes is we see that great kings, it goes to their head. They are successful in the military, and God gives them great success, and then they become arrogant, they become haughty, and they believe that they have more power than they do. And what haughtiness is that it's not that Moses, being the most humble person that ever lived, didn't realize how he was very, very unique. He did. But Moses, more than any human being that ever lived, was able to completely grasp that everything he had was from God, and that he sought nothing for himself. That's why Korah hurt him so much with words. That's why people could hurt Moses so much with words. Now, what happened is Uzziah was very successful on the battlefield, very successful. He was able to liberate parts of Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, along the coastal region. Eilat, the famous southern city in Eretz Yisrael, most southern city, he was very successful. Now, the year, I believe it was in the 25th year of his reign. I believe so. It was either the 25th or 27th year of his reign. What happens? He returns back from enormous success, and he essentially marches into the Beis Hamikdash, and that time was the right dead center of the first temple period. And he makes his way toward the incense altar with ketores, with incense. Now, this incense altar, which lied right in the center of the temple layout, is a right that HaKadosh Baruch Hu only gave for Kohanim, only was reserved for priests. Only priests could burn incense on the incense altar. No one else. Now, don't listen to the book of Hebrews, to that fake book. Listen to the Torah, to the Holy Torah. Because Hebrews wants to say that Jesus was a priest and a king. It can't be. Those two orders are completely separate, and they're going to be very separate in the Messianic age, but they're going to get along great. See the end of the book of Zechariah, chapter 6. So what happens is, you could, again, if you want to read this event, like line by line, sort of blow by blow, you won't get it in Isaiah. You will get it in 2 Chronicles 26. So he's going in. Now, imagine the priest observing the spectacle. Here comes the king, and he was not any king. He was a very successful king, and he was really a good person. But good people make mistakes. And what happened? They start screaming at him and telling him to stop. Stop! Stop! What are you doing? This is forbidden to a king. This is forbidden for someone who is from Malchus David, from the Davidic dynasty. It was forbidden for him to do this. But the Navi says that there was a pride. And that kind of pride is similar to the kind of thing that instigates speaking evil of someone else. There's a common denominator, because where do you come off ruining somebody's life by speaking ill of another person? Is because you feel, that person doesn't matter and I do. It comes from arrogance that you could destroy somebody's life with words and speak of them, and it's hard to undo. It's easy to speak. It's very difficult to unspeak. So there's that arrogance that lies at the heart of Lashon Hara, evil speech. Well, don't ask what's going on. You had a scene where some 80 priests are now running after Uzziah. And his heart was filled with pride. Bottom line is, as he was to bring the Ketores on the altar, leprosy came out right here on his head, on his forehead, and everyone was shocked. Now, why here on his forehead? Because this is where the high priest would have a plate that said "For Hashem." This was like the most striking thing you would see when a priest is wearing all his vestments. It means this was a trauma. It was, first of all, it was also a physical trauma. Jerusalem sits on an earthquake, quite the earthquake. We've had some very substantial ones over the big earthquakes. This is the only earthquake, to my memory, that's ever mentioned in Tanakh, and it's mentioned quite a number of times. The temple shook, the walls started caving, and don't ask. That's the earthquake that Isaiah was experiencing in chapter 6, where the walls were shaking and the whole building was filled with smoke, and the angels started going up and down, Kadosh, 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 holy, 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 meaning you can't break these things. You can't have kings usurp the role of what a priest should do, and you can't have the other way around. The Maccabees did the other way around. They misappropriated their role. And there's a heavenly temple and an earthly temple, and they're wired together. And if you break that, if you disrupt that, it causes a short circuit, and it just caused an earthquake, and the temple began to fall. Don't ask. That's why in Isaiah 6, the angels are going, they have wings. Like, why is this important to have wings? Is this an aerodynamic thing? No. But there's a lot of up and down in Isaiah 6. And even God is there figuratively in a throne, and his head is up and his feet are down, and he's wearing this long train robe. They go, why do I care? And why would God be wearing a robe? Did he take a shower? I'm being cute with you. Kindlech. That's why when you read Yeshai, if you don't understand this, you'll be so lost. What is being conveyed there is that what goes on above has to match what goes on below. And literally the Har Habayis, the Temple Mount, Mount Moriah, is the place where heaven and earth touch, where they meet. They could be connected by a ladder in a vision that Jacob, our father of blessed memory, had. So therefore, Uzziah was an interesting person, very great man. He was really a very good man. He was a very big tzaddik, but he made a very big mistake. The people loved him very dearly, but he made a big mistake in his life. And what was interesting about his life is that even though he received this tzaras, because this wasn't a Lashon Hara deal where he can be outside the camp and just return back and it's all good. This had to be a symbol for all generations that the magisterium of the priesthood and the king can never be confused. Hebrews is one short circuit. I mean, that's probably the least problem with canonical Christian teachings, but you can't ever confuse the covenant that God made with David HaMelech, Olav Shalom, David our king of blessed memory, and Aharon, the brother of Moshe Rabbeinu, my great-grandfather, to whom was given the authority of the priesthood. And those are never to be confused. They can't be. It will cause a short circuit. So here you had a very interesting case in Tanakh where Uzziah was beloved by the people, but it wasn't a Lashon Hara issue, but the antecedent, the seed of what triggers someone to allow them to say something bitter, haughtiness was there in the root. And as the result of that, he remained king. The people loved, they adored him. He made a mistake, but they adored him. So what they did is they made for him, he couldn't come back into the community as someone who told Lashon Hara might, because this was of a totally different nature. And they said it was miraculous, but it was a different nature. People had to know forever. This isn't the micro, this is macro. King and priest can never be confused. And we know it happened. That's why if you meet someone who says, I'm a descendant of a Maccabee, he's a liar. There are none left. The Maccabean family was wiped out completely. So therefore, because this wasn't a personal issue, but this was something of a magnitude of Davidic dynasty issue, this is not something where Uzziah could simply separate himself, as you would see in Leviticus and this, and immerse himself and come. It wasn't that. This was forever and ever. But this is very strange. Because as I said, Uzziah was really beloved. He was a good man who made a very big mistake. And this was not so much a punishment as it had to be a sign for all generations. These two offices can never be confused. The messianic promises that the high priest will sit in his throne, and it doesn't say, but the king will be in the other throne, and the council of peace will emerge between them. Zechariah 6, I think it's verse 13. It's the last passage of that chapter. Very famous. That's what's going to happen when Mashiach comes. So it was a very interesting arrangement where Uzziah, they set up a palace for him in a Beis HaChaim, which means in a cemetery, in a Beis HaKfaros, in a cemetery, because he could not interact with the people because he had the Torah. But he reigned from his palace, which was in the oddest place. Because remember, Tsaras is like you die. That's why, again, I'm just going to crisscross them so you'll see this. This is why it says, when describing the event where Isaiah receives his commission to be a prophet, Isaiah 6 should really be Isaiah 1 chronologically. It isn't beyond the scope of the show. But Isaiah 6 would chronologically be first because that's where Isaiah receives. God says, who's going to go for me? And Isaiah says, I will. And God says, actually, don't say anything. I want to punish them. That's a whole other issue. But the key is Isaiah 6 really starts first. It isn't first for another reason. And here's the other thing, my delicious brothers and sisters. Listen up. Listen up and taste the honey of Torah. Really. Just put in your mouth. It's all very good. It's the most delicious thing I've had. It's very rare in Tanakh. It happens, but it's rare where one prophet or one book in Tanakh mentions another book. It happens, rare. If I asked you where, you would have a hard time coming up with it. Unless, in the book of Joshua, of course, you'll have, words about the Torah of Moses. Joshua was his was the person who received ordination in the continue of Moses. But besides that, you don't have, it's rare, very rare, to have one book in Tanakh make reference to another book in Tanakh. Why? Because it's not a history book. Each book is there to tell you how to live your life. That's all it is. It's one big hospital, and it's there to make you better. And there's a lot to be said on that. I'm not going to. But here it is, children from above. If you look at 2 Chronicles 26, and you go to the very end of that chapter, you have one of those exceptions. You have in Isaiah 26, in 2 Chronicles chapter 26, all the events that I described to you of Uzziah, Azariah taking from the Keturahs, and the chapter ends by saying, and if you want to know the beginning and the end, meaning you want to fill in more information about what happened, go to Isaiah. I'm not kidding. It says go to Isaiah because Isaiah fills that in. And strikingly, if you read Isaiah, you wouldn't even know what happened unless you go to Second Chronicles. Because when Isaiah was written, Second Chronicles hadn't yet been written. So, my dear friend, you asked a brilliant question. I'm very grateful to you because it allowed me to immerse in Torah with all these dear viewers, and studying Tanakh is wow. It's Yishakeni b'nashikos piyu ki tovim doidechu miyoy, and kiss me with the kisses of thy lips, for thy love is better than wine. There's nothing like Tanakh. It really is so delicious and all fits properly, but you have to study it. And thank you for that opportunity. We should study Torah, and that should bring the coming of should be the Bias Gael, bring the coming of the true Redeemer quickly in our time. Thank you for your question.
Indeed, indeed. All right, we're going to move on to this next caller. Caller, welcome to the show. Please tell us your name and where you're calling from. You're live on the air.
My name is Steve. I'm calling from Florida.
Steve, welcome.
And I'm a non-Trinitarian Christian.
Okay, very good. Thank you. What's the question for you?
And my question for Talia is, do the Jews have a council of rabbis that will evaluate a person they think may be the Messiah, and what qualifications are they looking for?
That was an excellent question. Very good.
Yeah.
Go ahead and hang up now. You can tune in for your answer, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you for your call. All right, Rabbi.
So the answer is no. The answer is no because the whole world will know. It's not just the council of rabbis. The answer is if you look at, actually, one part of your question answers the other part of your question. The theme that is repeated most frequently about an identifying feature of the Messianic age is everyone will know, not just some fancy council of rabbis with long beards. The whole world will know. If the whole world doesn't know, it's not him. He's the wrong guy. If only half the world knows, the wrong guy. If a third of the world knows, the wrong guy. Forget all that. So really one question answers the other. Now, there were a council of sages who would evaluate if someone was a true prophet. That is. But as it turns out, Mashiach is not identified as a prophet. Maybe he will be a prophet, possibly, but in a sense, it applies him because the Spirit of Hashem will dwell in him, but it's not. He's not there speaking prophecy as an oracular prophet. We don't find that. Rather, he's giving haichacha, rebuke to the nations, and they're going to listen very carefully. And his sovereignty will be from one end to the other, from river to sea. And as a result, the world's going to change the ways. That everybody is going to listen. What did the Mashiach say? Mashiach is the the, the Gadol Hador, the giant of the generation, who the world will understand that this Nasi, this prince, is acting on behest of Hashem, and the world will know. So it says the opposite. You don't need a council of rabbis. You don't need any of that. Everybody will know it. Why? Because it says so. This is not. I think this might be called the Tovia Singer Show. We changed it. This is a Tanakh show. This is what did the prophets say? That the prophets tell us that the knowledge of Hashem will cover the world as the water covers the sea. In Isaiah, that's Isaiah chapter 11, verse 9. The Navi tells us very clearly what's going to happen when Mashiach comes. He will rebuke the nations. And what will happen? That the people will come and say, let's go to the house of Hashem, let's go to the mountain of Hashem, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he will teach us his ways and we will go in his path. And listen to this, verse 4, and he will judge between the nations and will rebuke many people. This is what he's going to do. And people are going to listen to him. And they'll beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, neither will they learn of war anymore. A verse which you can be sure no book in the Christian Bible will ever quote, not in a million years, is Zechariah chapter 9, verse 10. That the chariots of Ephraim, and I will cut off the chariots. I will cut off the chariots of Ephraim, and the bow of war will be removed. The horses of battle will be removed, and he'll speak peace to the nations, and they're going to listen to him. His authority in one end to the other. See Daniel chapter 7, verse 14. All the nations are going to adhere to him. They're going to serve him. And don't listen to what they tell you. They're trying to tell you that they're going to worship him. It's all nonsense. It means that he will speak and the world is going to listen. So it's to be the council of the human race. Now, of course, there will be a segment of society. There'll be two parts to them. Two sections of humanity will go to war prior to the coming of Mashiach. Immediately in that Tekufa, in that epic, they'll be cut off completely. But a third part of these are talking about the non-Jews, they will be saved. This passage in Zechariah 13, verse 8 and 9 is widely misunderstood. So it won't go, there's a man here who claims to be the Messiah. What does the council of rabbis say? I'll tell you a funny thing. There's here in Israel, I think they call the Jesus syndrome. I'm not kidding. They have, there are people who come visit Israel, and here in Eretz Yisrael, it's a very holy place. It just is. You walk in Yerushalayim, your eyes dance. The air is full of holiness. Really, it's not. You just take a deep breath in. Your mind, the air of Eretz Yisrael makes you wiser. Just right. If you've not been to Israel, the kedusha, the holiness dances. It really is something, the most beautiful thing you ever saw. It's a place of tremendous sparks of holiness is everywhere. People just walk and they're just, and it's not that if you're a tourist and just landed and go lose you. I've been living here in Israel for um, almost 11 months. You could, it's about 11 months. Actually, it's almost exactly 11 months. Yeah. Every day I go out, I can't believe what I'm saying. Where am I going with this? There are people who are struggling with challenges, with mental challenges, and they should have a complete recovery. But there are people who suffer a little bit, and it is very common for people walking the street to think that they're Moses or they're a prophet or that they're Jesus. That's why I think it's called the Jesus syndrome. And they wind up in places like the Abarbanel Hospital, which is a hospital to help people who are struggling mentally. So you have all kinds of people running around here. I'm laughing. I don't mean to laugh. There are people really walking around saying they're Messiah. People are dressed like biblical figures. Not everywhere, but it's very common. The people just walking around, not hurting anybody, but they're walking around, with a stick. They're just take my word for it. They look and they watch the movies of biblical figures, so they know how to do the dress. Well, there are actually some very wonderful people who dress that way. They wear a beged ivri. They're not saying these things. So, therefore, my friends, the way we will know Mashiach is here is because events will unfold. Most important, the worldwide knowledge of Hashem. V'hoya Hashem lamelech hakol haaretz, that God will be king of the whole world. He's not king now. But if a king is not accepted by all the subjects, then it's a problem. Mashiach comes, then the whole world will say, Hashem is king, and the Mashiach will be his prince. That's why he's called a Nasi. Under Vicheskel. Read Ezekiel 37, 24 and 25. The whole world will know, and then he will be one, his name will be one. All the nations, they're going to go back to where things were prior to the Tower of Babel, where the nations will disperse and speaking different languages. Mashiach comes, they're going to speak one pure speech. Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 9. A Beis HaMikdash, the temple we built in Yerushalayim. And then the nations will know that I am Lord, when your sanctuary will be among you. Where does it say that? Ezekiel chapter 37, verse 26 through 28, and the whole end of Yechezkel. And all this will be preceded by an event where Elijah the prophet will usher in the coming of Mashiach. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to keep his promise that all the Kindlech, all the Jewish people, all the Bnei Israel are going to return to this holy land. How is he going to do that? There are Jews who live so far away. Hashem has a promise, and the God of Israel doesn't lie. He's not a faker, and he's not a shakran. He's not a liar. Hashem is emes. And therefore, when the prophet Isaiah of blessed memory says in Isaiah 43, verse 6, I'm going to find all of you from the northland and the south. I'm going to say, give back my daughters, bring my sons from afar. I will find you from the furthest most islands, from the ends of the earth. It's happening now. It's happening now. Prepare yourself. So these events will occur. You don't need council of rabbis. It'll be the council of humanity. Everyone will get it. If everyone doesn't get it, it isn't. No one's going to say, oh, I know there's a resurrection dead, there's a building. Can I see your identification? I hear this from Christians, William. I don't know if you have you heard this from Christians? They say, how will you know the Messiah comes from the house of David?
Right.
You ever hear that? 5,000 times. Like they say, hold on, buddy. I know everyone is now following you, and everything you say everyone's doing. And there's a temple now in Jerusalem, and there's a resurrection, the ingathering, and the Elijah came. But let me see your driver's license. I want to see your passport for 1 second. I want to see you from the house of David. Saying that he's going to be from David and a fulfillment of the Davidic promises, that's not a sign. They're just telling you he's going to be from the Davidic house.
Right.
I know many people today who are from the house of David. There are hundreds of thousands of such people that are from the house of David. Not all of them could be the Messiah. It's quite a family. So that's how people know. You don't need the council of rabbis. You did need the council of rabbis, meaning you needed the Sanhedrin to decide, was Ovadja a prophet? So that they did have to do. That's a prophet. That's not Mashiach. There are criteria in the Torah, specifically Deuteronomy 13 and 18 and so on. But Mashiach, everyone's going to know. If you have to ask, then he's not Mashiach. Thank you for your question.
And it seems like that, like you said, I mean, the question kind of answered itself too. I mean, if the whole world knows, well,
Right.
does every human being in the world want to see his ID? That's the question. And so that's what the whole point. It answered itself. You're right.
The point is they know.
Yeah.
It's sort of built
Right,
into the
right.
system.
For example, if
This
Jesus,
is why. Go ahead. What's that?
okay, so like for example, when Jesus came, if at that time the whole world knew that he was a Messiah, then there wouldn't be a big deal about his identity because the whole world would know. But the whole world didn't know.
Yeah. Now it's funny you say that. That
Okay.
was very intelligent, William. For you, this was intelligent. I'm kidding.
Thank
I'm
you.
kidding. I love you.
I do
both.
try.
It's interesting that you said that, because it's interesting that in the book of Mark, the earliest gospel, it's 16 chapters. The first 8 chapters, actually, nobody knows who he is. Nobody has any clue. That's the whole point of it. Like, who is he? So forget it. That's all. All of that is not. And the fact that there are multiple religions and thousands of denominations, it all means it's not him. When the true Mashiach comes, everyone will know, and no one will have that question. If there's a question, it means it's not him.
Right.
Everyone will know. And my friends, I can't tell you, I hear voices, but I can tell you this. We're close. Time is not far away. We're already in this messianic process, and the world is more sensitive now than ever in history. Events have occurred that are unprecedented in history. I'm talking about this virus. You all know what I'm talking about. And we have to prepare for this moment now. Thank you for your question.
Awesome. Okay, we'll take the next caller. Caller, welcome to the show. You're live on the air. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from.
Hi, this is Bernadette, and I'm calling from
Welcome.
Barhead, Alberta.
Nice. Welcome, Bernadette.
Good morning.
Good morning.
William and
Thank you.
Talia.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Barhead. This is other. Let me just ask you, Barhead, are there any Gentiles there, or is it all Jewish still? No, I'm kidding. Go ahead. I'm joking around with you.
All Gentiles except us.
Right.
Because I can't
my
find
question-
non-Jews in Barhead. Everyone's walking around. They're Hasidic. It's all kosher food. It's like being in Borough Park. All right, I'm kidding. Go ahead.
I wish. My question is what is happening, like in the Bible, about David's family? Okay, so when Samuel comes and he tells the father to get all his sons, they don't even include David. And David was sent to be a shepherd, basically for him to be killed by wild animals. I mean, they didn't even regard him as a son. Right. That's my question.
It's a very good question. Thank you.
Okay,
Very
go
good.
ahead and hang up now, Bernadette, and you can tune in for your answer, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. All right, Rabbi, take it away.
Thank you, dear. What a great question. This is like people have been studying all week to ask like the best possible questions. And isn't it interesting that in Tanakh you often have the person people didn't suspect. Isaac, he didn't think Jacob was his boy. I mean, he thought it was his boy, but he thought, Esau. And you have that very often, that the right people come from the oddest places. Abraham came from a home of idolaters, and everybody's like just thrown off. Where did you come from? And it tells people that even if people don't think you've got it together, you do. Hashem is working behind the scenes. And here, Samuel, the last of the prophets and a great, great Navi, he now is to anoint a king, and he's sent to the home of Jesse. Jesse is a father to 8 boys from 2 wives. One Elihu from, it's not important, he has 8 sons. But frankly, he thought that, it would be the older 7 who would have any potential. David was a shepherd boy. Now this ties in so yummy to Ezekiel 34, because ultimately, and Hosea 3, where the Mashiach is a shepherd, and he's of course doing the work of Hashem, performing it on earth. Very great man. And we see that through, in fact, many great prophets who were shepherds. King David wasn't the only one. But Jesse thought, so all my older sons, they should be the one. And he brings them in front of Shmuel Hanav. He must have been very happy to find out which ones. And Shmuel is looking them over, and he's not just using the sight of his physical eyes, but using spiritual eyes. Again, doesn't that sound so much like Isaiah 11:1? Don't you want to just grab a Tanakh and run away to some island and just study it and fill your mind up with the most beautiful thoughts? It's really very, very, very splendid. And as it turned out, he just didn't think, you of all people, he's David, the one. There was a complicated, I'm not going to get into Jesse wasn't sure of his lineage, we're not going to get into it, we'll just stick with what Tanakh is. But ultimately what happens is that Shmuel turns to Jesse, and Jesse was a very great man, and he says, do you paraphrasing, do you by any chance have another kid? You could just imagine that scene. The 7 brothers are there, and Shmuel looks them over, and they're all standing there. They're great men, and he has Jesse to have it, and Jesse was like, imagine the look on his face. He said, well, there is a youngest one, but he's bring him here. So that's what happens. That's the story of the Jewish people too. Which nation is most cursed today? Really? I mean, cursed. The nation of Israel, Judaism. I find so frequently that when Christians repent and are choosing the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they work up the guts to tell their parents, the visceral response they frequently receive is such a hurricane of fury that I think if they told them that Dad, who's a pastor in Assemblies of God Church, I became an atheist, it's not that he'd be happy, but he wouldn't be that furious. Being a Jew is the worst thing you can do as far as the church goes. What? The Jews? So that's what David is. So at times you don't realize what you need, what kind of person to work with. David was this gentle soul, this thoughtful soul. And you see that even in his life, which was treacherous, he had so many problems. He had Shaul, who would turn out to become his father, who was trying to kill him. And believe me, King David, if he didn't have the right temperament, he could have had many chances to kill Saul. and he was anointed, and he didn't. He's a very special person. He was such a shocking person. No one ever expected anything from him. This is David, who would emerge to be one of the great people in Tanakh. In a way, he's very special. He is mentioned in Tanakh more frequently than anybody else. Over 1,000 times, David HaMelech is spoken of in Tanakh, and so frequently he is completely misunderstood. In that people think, in 1 Samuel 17, very famously, where the Philistine Goliath is taunting the nation of Israel, and David steps forward to volunteer to take on this giant. He had a brother who really was not very happy with him. He wasn't one of the best people in the world, but he was taunted for this. And ultimately, you know how the story goes. And King David goes out and defeats Goliath. And then Shaul turns to his, I think it's verse 56 of 1 Samuel 17. Yes. Whose son is that? Now, he already knew whose son it was. He knew because he knew his last name. But Shaul is asking, like, whose son is that? Meaning, is he of royal descent? It's funny. The guys who translated the Septuagint, was translated over and over and over again. They didn't understand why Shaul goes, whose kid is that? Could you just tell me whose kid that is? Now, he really should have known from the past. That was such a dramatic thing. Shaul is now not asking, I need to know his last name and his social security number. Shaul is now going, this might be a threat, because it seems like no ordinary person could have done this. And what's funny is that whoever rendered the Septuagint, as I told you in many other lectures, is not the original Septuagint, just 5 books of Moses. It was rendered many times, and sometimes the translator just played games or didn't like something and changed something. And in the Septuagint, they actually leave this end of 1 Samuel 17 just not in there. They just took it out. Ooh, why is he repeating the question? They didn't get it because people are playing monkey game. They're playing monkey games with Tanakh. That's really not a very good idea, is it? The idea is that you never know where it's coming from. You never know how Hashem is using something so unusual, so from the back door to bring about his salvation. And to fool Satan sometimes. The Satan doesn't know where it's coming from. Who would have thought? Who would have believed? And the idea that no one would have believed this is not my words. It's the words. I'm using it because I'm really sometimes not telling you. I'm plagiarizing. These are the words in the Navi that characterizes the response of the non-Jews, the nations of the world, when Klal Yisrael is lifted up, is saved and redeemed in 52, and the nations are beside themselves. The kings of nations will say, it's the last passage of 52, verse 15. They would say, they're going to go, kings will shut their mouths because of them. For that which has not been told to them, they will see. What they never heard, they will comprehend. They're going to be shocked. So King David, in a sense, his whole life, and this very intriguing part of his whole life, is just like the Jews. That people go, and that's the question they're going to ask. Isaiah 53:1, which missionaries foolishly use against us, which really against them. It's mamish upside down. the missionaries say Jews should worship idols and join Christianity because of Isaiah 53. It's just the opposite. Isaiah 53 is a soliloquy, contains a soliloquy of the Gentile kings of nations and how they will respond to the what was unthinkable to them. They're not my words. Read 52:15, the last word. The chapter break is artificial. And what are they going to ask the question? The kings of nations, Isaiah 53:1. Me, Hemel Shmuasenu, Israel Hashem, Hami Niglasa. Who would have believed such a report? And look to whom the arm of the Lord has been revealed. So the nations are going to be bewildered. And that again is very much like David's family was just bewildered. The Christians, which on a superficial level see us as a similar language or similar religion in that Christianity emerged out of a Jewish crucible, still could not. The Jews are right all this time, and they'll be stunned. This idea of I didn't know where this was going to come from. The very passage that the church used to baptize our people, to spiritually slaughter our people, is the very passage that tells us how the nations will be so deeply surprised when they finally Mashiach comes and they see that the Jews will be vindicated. And if you think I'm making it up, I'm putting it in, read it for yourself. Isaiah 52 is about Klal Yisrael vindicated from all of its enemies. 54, she's the barren woman, couldn't have children, and she'll have plenty. And no weapon formed against you will succeed. Kindlech, it's time to wake up. So that's why David HaMelech is that way. That's why Samuel will actually want to know where's the other kid, because these aren't it. And even Jesse went, really? So it's such music. Tanakh is such music, so beautiful. It fits. It's so good for your mind. It's so good for your heart. It's really mili malyusa. It's words that just lift you up. You just have to just know it a little bit. Okay, my dear friends? Sheikh is coming soon, please God. Study Tanakh. Thank you.
Right on, right on. Rabbi, you got time for one more?
Let's do one more.
Okay, cool. All right, caller, you're live on the air. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from.
Hi, this is Michael Perdue from Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Looks like you got in, Michael.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Very good. Go ahead with the question.
Rabbi Singer, I have a question. I've recently received Volume 1 of Let's Get Biblical, and I love it. It's a great book. And I understand why Christians would want to reject the oral Torah. But my question specifically, I've heard that the Karaite Jews reject the oral Torah on scriptural means. And I was wondering if you could maybe elaborate on that. Why do they do that? Perhaps.
That's great. Yeah.
Michael,
right. Thank you for the question. If you want to go ahead and hang up now, you can tune in for the answer, okay?
Great. Thank y'all so much.
Hey, thank you too.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. Okay, guys, phone line's closed. This will be our final topic for the day. Rabbi, take it away.
All right. So, as it turns out, today there are a lot of website Karaites, but there are Karaites. So this is a heresy of Judaism that started in the 8th century. And like every big fight started out as a political fight. And the character that emerges that ultimately triggered, like Karaites are going to hate me for saying this. They don't like it. But there was a institution called the Reish Galusa. The Reish Galusa means the head. It literally means the head of the exile. Rosh Galusa. It's although it's an Aramaic construct, and essentially who was the leader of the Babylonian Jewish community, and the Babylonian Jewish community was the leading Jewish community in the world. I don't want to go through the history of it, but when the Jews were exiled to Bavel, great institutions were established there by prophets. And those institutions continued for well over 1,000 years, actually, to not that long ago. And the Reish Galusa, I'm just summing this all up for you, had an enormous amount of power. And at that time, because in Bavel was under the control of the Islamic Caliphate, had input of who was going to be designated as leader of the Jewish community, and it very often was, not always, but it was, family and so on, and it was handed down to family, because the person who's the Reish Galusa also was from the house of David. Now, what happens? What I laugh because it's a tragedy, and I don't want to cry on air. But what happens when the person who thinks he's in line to be the exilarch, which means the head of this very prestigious institution. What happens if he doesn't get the job and someone else is chosen instead? Well, what happens is war. I think you said you're from Baton Rouge or wherever you said you're from. You're an American. I could tell from your accent. So the bloodiest war that America fought was not Vietnam. We lost almost 60,000 kids. Bloody. Nothing. World War II, whatever, 500,000. But the Civil War, maybe a million people, a million Americans died in the Civil War. In 19th century, and in the 19th century, it wasn't so simple to kill a million people. There's no war like a family fight. Okay, as I'm trying to convey to you, and you see that all over the place. A family fight, forget about it. Now, if you don't get the job and someone else gets this very prestigious job, the person who we're very interested in is a man named Anan ben David. Although David wasn't really his father's name, but because they were from the Davidic house, that was the name assigned. He doesn't get the job. So it's, well, then a pox on all of you. And he splinters away. And now, what would you do if you're going to say, the hell with you? And what would you do? Like, what kind of revenge would you take? So think about this, because you want to smell this. So what you would do is you would then say that the whole institution is no good. You would just do a scorched earth approach where you just burn the whole thing down and say that the rabbinic authority, which was certainly in the hands of the exilarch of the Reish Galusa, that means there's tremendous authority who these sages were. And there were many, 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 many great, great, great sages. So what would you burn down to the ground? So Anan he wasn't an atheist, to say there was no God. See, but what you would say is that the whole movement of great sages who would pass down often from father to son and would be moved down represents the shalshelet, the chain that where the Torah was handed down with all the oral tradition was handed down from generation to generation. We see in Tanakh that oral Torah is passed down. You won't know where to look for it if you're not completely conversant in Tanakh, but it's all over the place, where the oral Torah is all over. So what you would do is you would then say, if I can't be the lead, I'm going to rephrase this, but this is what happened. if I can't be the lead rabbi, then there aren't going to be rabbis. Or if I can't be the lead rabbi, then rabbis have no authority. And this was so bitter. It was so personal that it was war. This was civil war. And that's where the Karaite movement emerged. It emerged in Babylon. And it grew. Today, there are Karaite Jews. There are. It's not many. A lot of people who are Karaite Jews today who are on Facebook, social media, their parents weren't Karaites, but the idea that the rabbis are all corrupt and there's no alternative could be attractive. So people often will be drawn to it because they just don't like the institution of rabbis, but they don't really realize the enormity of what they're saying. Because without an oral Torah, you would not have performed the commandments. So much so, listen to this. This will blow your mind out the way. Your frontal lobe will shoot into your spleen. So in practice, Karaites were not atheists. They just said there's no oral Torah. But there's a big problem. If a Christian says we don't believe in the oral Torah, Christians don't keep written Torah. If you don't keep written Torah, you don't understand how preposterous that is. So the Karaites had to literally come up with their own oral Torah, which very often mimicked what the regular Jews believed. They call us rabbinate Jews because it's like the Christians saying, oh, rabbinic Judaism, and it's meant derisively. It's not as a compliment. So, but in order to keep the Torah is so vague. The Torah tells us you should wear tefillin, the totafos. It's a word never used anywhere in Tanakh. Like, what is it? What are you supposed to bind on your head? You would never know what that is unless you had an oral information of precisely what that was. And in case anybody is wondering, they found 24 phylacteries in the caves of Qumran. And they're on display for the whole world to see in the Israel Museum in the Shrine of the Book. Anyone want to, you can go to the Shrine of the Book and you can see one of the 24 phylacteries. And those phylacteries are precisely according to the laws that we use today. Exact same thing. That's 2,200 years ago. You understand? So the Karaite movement essentially emerged, and it's very attractive to say that the rabbis it's a conspiracy, and the rabbis are just taking upon themselves authority for which they don't have, especially if you were expelled or you were not given the authority you craved. Now, there are many scholars that trace the Karaite movement to the Sadducees, the Tzedukim, which basically disappeared after the destruction of the Second Temple. Why? Not important. It basically faded away after the temple was destroyed. But that element of it is certainly in common. And it also began with a personal vendetta. So if you think it through, if you're not given the job, then a pox on all of you, then there is no such job. And I'm going to oppose the institution for which I was supposed to get the job for. Got it? And that is how the Karaites began. Now, they developed a whole apologetics of why. But I have volumes on this. I discussed this, and I have a very large chapter on this in Volume 1, Let's Get Biblical, and audio programs and many, many lectures on this topic. And as I said, the Karaites had to, you wouldn't believe it if you didn't study the topic. If you study it, there's no lack of literature on this. They had to develop their own customs, own traditions to fill in the gaps because the Torah doesn't say what to do, how to do it. So they had to develop their own tradition. They just assigned those traditions not to it comes from Moses, but it comes from their reasoned inference that their scholars, early scholars had, and then they transmitted it. So they had to essentially mimic the real thing in a system that rejects that these traditions come from Moses, recognizing that you can't perform it unless you have some explanation for what these things are. I have just offended a lot of Karaites, but what can I do? I can't hide this under the carpet. And I have a lot of Karaites who are, I don't know, they're followers of mine. They won't like this, and they really don't like that this comes from Anan ben David. They don't like that because they. But here's what and I'll end with this. I mean, this is what you think in your mind. So where in Jewish literature prior to the 8th century do people self-identify as Karaites? Nowhere. So it begins. So Anan ben David lived from essentially from like I think he was born in 715, 714. He died right at the end of the 8th century. I think he died in 795. So there's nothing prior to him where people calling themselves Karaites or anything like that. So you have to think this is just another way of looking at it. If, in fact, the truth was that there's no oral Torah, and the rabbis just made it all up, and even though, again, it's all over Tanakh, just people don't know where to look for it. But we'll set that aside. Then why do the Karaites come later? It should have been if Rabbinic Judaism, meaning Pharisaic Orthodox Judaism, was a later iteration, a later man-made invention. You should have Karaite Judaism from the get-go. And then in the 8th century, some guy decided he wanted to make up stuff that it came from Moses. It should have been the reverse. Then why did we come first? That's it. Today, the fight is largely over, except on the internet. Today, there are Karaite communities. They're in Israel. They're in the coastal cities. There's an ancient Karaite synagogue in Jerusalem in the old city, but it's largely a museum today. I don't think it's not used in regular services and so on. If you're watching this and you're a Karaite, please don't be offended. You know that whenever I'm asked to prove something, I'm asked to prove it. I prove from the written Torah because Christians don't believe in the oral Torah. Why? Because someone told them not to. But anyways, soon it's not a real dispute because there was a time when the Karaites were huge in Babylon and other areas and in Turkey. There were very big communities. They're not anymore. There are some, very little. There was once a big Karaite community in Egypt. Jews, gone. Now, did they move to Eretz Yisrael? They did, but today it's all withering away. And that's the story, my friends. Anan ben David, and it always starts with something political, and then it explodes into personal and religious and customs. Well, there's your answer. Thank you so much for that phone call. William?
Yes, sir.
You did good this time.
Thank you. Good show, Rabbi. Very good. It's always good with you here, no doubt about it. So we'll see you, Rabbi, next week, Hashem willing, and everybody else. Guys, don't forget to go to outreachjudaism.org for Rabbi's 2-volume book set. CDs are no longer available, but the audio files are. So you can check out free audio at the very top at one of the tabs on the website. An image for you on the screen now of the CDs that you missed out on. I like having things in my hands, so that's good, though, either way. So, but thank you guys once again, and we'll see you guys next week. Once again, as you want. Take care. Bye-bye.
אתם תמיד תמיד כולם ביחד, חשוב מכל חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד. איפוק זו העוצמה, ויתור זו הגדולה, השאיפה